Transformations in Europe, 1500 to 1750.
Focus question. How did the early transformations of Europe impact the peoples of 1500 to 1750? How did the early transformations impact modern day? The Protestant Reformation. In the early 1500s, the Protestant Reformation was a movement within the Latin Christian Church that resulted in protesters forming several new Christian denominations. During his reign, Pope Leo X aggressively raised funds through the sales of indulgences. The funds would later be used for St. Peter's Basilica and other arts. Martin Luther, a monk, saw this practice and other excesses as intolerable and corrupt and wrote the 95 Theses.
It's Martin Luther. Indulgences? Nope. I got 95 Theses, and indulgence is one.
The 95 Theses are a list of propositions and questions by Martin Luther, which he nailed to the door of a church in Wittenberg. He was prompted to write the theses by the Catholic Church's questionable practice of selling indulgences. He is writing to the Church and Pope Leo X, challenging their corrupt actions and exposing them to commoners. The actions of the Church are the subject of this document, as Martin Luther questions them. His first two theses discuss his idea that salvation is based on faith and not on deeds, as the Church had been preaching. In the rest of the theses, he sounds very skeptical, denouncing the Church's sale of indulgences. This map illustrates both the spread of Lutheranism and the spread of Calvinism from 1500 to 1600. The spread of Lutheranism begins in 1517, the year Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses to the door of a church in Wittenberg. Lutheranism spreads in all directions, including beyond the Holy Roman Empire as well as to the center of the empire, where many Luther-inspired peasant revolts took place. Calvinism began to spread from Geneva in 1541, when he returned to Geneva as head of the church and drew up a church order. Calvinism spreads into France, to East Europe, to the Netherlands, and to Scotland. The Catholic Reformation.
In response to the Protestant Reformation, the Catholic Church began the Catholic Reformation movement. This movement clarified Catholic theology and reformed clerical training and discipline. The creation of the Society of Jesus, or Jesuits, by the Spanish nobleman Ignatius of Loyola in 1540 played an important part in the Reformation by converting peoples of Asia, African, and Americas through missions.
The witch hunts. During the late 16th and 17th centuries, the belief in white and black magic were very widespread. Some men and women were accused of possessing special powers derived from the devil or other unknown demons. In order to enforce orthodoxy and prevent the heresy of witchcraft, Protestants and Catholics both conducted witch hunts throughout Europe, arresting, trying, and a majority of the time, executing the accused. The Scientific Revolution.
Between 1550 and 1700, the Scientific Revolution was an intellectual movement in Europe, initially associated with planetary motion and aspects of physics that assisted the groundwork for modern science. The Scientific Revolution consisted of influential intellectuals who sought to use science to reinforce religious beliefs.
One of the major characters of the scientific revolution was Galileo Galilei, an Italian who lived in the mid-17th century. Galileo improved the scientific instruments such as the telescope, barometer, and thermometer. Look at the sun and stars. He was known to be an advocate for the heliocentric theory, the theory that states that Earth revolves around the sun. This theory originated from Nicholas Copernicus, a Polish monk and mathematician who lived around the late 15th and early 16th century. The heliocentric theory was seen as a heretical idea and went against the Catholic Church's theory that states the universe revolves around the Earth. Galileo and many intellectuals of the scientific revolution believed that science and religion can coincide with each other. However, by showing that Aristotelian and biblical writers that held ideas that were not supported by science, they opened the doors to others who used reason and logic to challenge a broader range of unquestioned tradition.
In this chart, some of the influential thinkers during the scientific revolution of 1550 to 1700 are seen. As mentioned before, Copernicus and Galileo made great contributors to the scientific revolution. But there were other contributors seen on this chart, such as Francis Bacon, Johannes Kepler, and Isaac Newton, who influenced society's thoughts on new ideas and innovations. Francis Bacon constructed the scientific revolution, which applied reason and observation to prove beliefs. Johannes Kepler came up with the laws of planetary motion, and Isaac Newton discovered the laws of gravity, motion, and calculus.
The Enlightenment.
The Age of the Enlightenment was during the course of the 18th century about the radically oriented European politics, philosophies, science, and communications. The philosophical movement fostered the belief that one could reform society by discovering rational laws that govern social behavior and were just as scientific as the laws of physics.
Some of the major well-known influences during the Enlightenment were Thomas Hobbes,
I believe that a man in his natural state is selfish and savage, and therefore a single absolute ruler is the best form of government.
John Locke,
I believe in life, liberty, and property.
and Montesquieu.
I believe in checks and balances and the separation of powers in a government.
One of the major themes that embodied the Enlightenment was individualism, which gave the idea that a man is endowed with certain liberties and rights.
The bourgeoisie.
In 16th century Europe, society was dominated by noble families who had special church, government, military, and tax privileges. Prosperous commoners, such as bureaucrats and the clergy, were below them. Most men and women were in poverty and struggled to find jobs. The poorest people, the bottom of the social hierarchy, had to resort to guile, begging, and crime. Urban wealth came from manufacturing and finance, but especially from trade, both within Europe and overseas. The French called the urban class that was dominated these activities the bourgeoisie. They dedicated long hours to their business and used their profits to pay for new ventures.
Women.
Women remained subordinate to men, but their gender did not determine their position in life as much as their class and their wealth did. Higher class families arranged the marriages of their children in pursuit of their interests. Young women had to work to save up for a dowry that would be given to their potential husbands. I hate working for such long hours.
But we have to save up for a dowry.
Hey! Get back to work! You want money for your dowry? Then get something done! Or you're fired.
Joint stock companies.
Initially, people invested money into banks, where money was invested into real estate and loaned monies to factories. Eventually, people seeking higher returns gave rise to joint stock companies, the precursor to modern corporation. A joint stock company was a business backed by the government that sold shares to individuals to raise money for its trading enterprises and to spread the risk and profits among investors. Shares were bought and sold at stock exchanges, which originated in Italy and still exists today.
Stockbrokers continue to buy and sell shares of companies in hopes of making a profit. At the moment, the most notable stock exchange is the New York Stock Exchange.
The Little Ice Age.
Since 1300, Europe experienced minimal improvement in agriculture efficiency, leading to famine and little surplus. From around 1590, a century-long climate cooling began, called the Little Ice Age. Average temperatures dropped only a few degrees, but this had a significant impact on agricultural output. At this time, peasants were already struggling due to war and economic issues. The Little Ice Age only worsened their condition. This graph expresses the price of wheat in Dutch guilders per 100 kilograms. The x-axis represents the year, while the y-axis represents the price of wheat per 100 kilograms. At about year 1600, in France and Italy in particular, wheat prices skyrocketed. Since the weather was cooler, it was more difficult to grow wheat and output decreased. Therefore, with still high demands, prices rose. Prices after 1800 also rose significantly, especially in England. Deforestation and coal.
Deforestation was a result of the high consumption of fuel during the 16th and 17th centuries. Wood was used for cooking, heating, and producing iron. Because of the scarcity of wood, its price rose and people resorted to using coal as an alternative. Unfortunately, the burning of coal caused air pollution, which was another environmental problem that arose during this period. The English Civil War.
The English Civil Wars from 1642 to 1651 were caused by a conflict between King Charles I of England and Parliament. He raised taxes without summoning Parliament. As a result, he was forced to summon Parliament to impose taxes to pay for the army. Afterwards, Parliament insisted that the king must obey the body's traditional rights, but he refused and began arresting those who criticized him. In 1648, he was militarily defeated but still refused to compromise with Parliament. In 1649, a rump parliament ordered his execution.
Hello, Parliament. I, King Charles I, demand that you raise the taxes. This is because, as you know, there has been a rebellion in Scotland, so we must raise the funds to create a new army.
Yes, but you must consult the Parliament more often.
Apologies, but that would not be happening.
But you must follow the body's traditional rights.
You dare oppose me? Guard, take them away!
You arrested half the Parliament. You never listened to us. Now meet your doom.
Ha! I'll never give up.
You're done for.
I go from a corruptible to an incorruptible crown, where no disturbance can be, no disturbance in this world.